turnover at halfway. Oh, yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Clock at 10. Adams the off balance. Oh, oh my goodness.
Two on the clock.
Alrighty, guys, and welcome back to another episode of the Basketball Fix podcast, Supercoach Sessions with myself and Jeremy Dark. Do we really want to be doing this episode, though, this week, Jeremy? Because we have probably had two of the roughest weeks, like a lot of you guys out there, but two of the roughest weeks that I can remember playing Supercoach, fantasy of any sorts. How you going, though, mate? Give us a bit of an insight and obviously how you're going and touch on your ranking, what you scored and what went well and what didn't go well.
Yeah, well, a lot didn't go well. There wasn't a lot that went well. But I feel that I think a lot of people are in the exact same boat as me. I think I was projected over 400 this week and scored 267. Dropped 1,420 places in the rankings down to 1,579th. So pretty rubbish, but I think getting such an average score, I expected to be further down. So it does give you a little bit of confidence that maybe the other people that started the season as well as I did struggled a little bit this week. And then even, last week I think hurt me more because of the captain choice. And there was a lot of people that were top contenders that would have had Kendrick Davis, and I had Adams who bombed. And then, didn't Adams and his little got a sore back problem let us down this week. I think hurt you more than it hurt me because you traded him in. I had him and it was just a given, so I didn't at least waste a trade on the dud. But it was a tough week. In my public league, I got beaten by a guy that had 2 DMPs in his lineup, so that's how bad I went. But
It's tough.
Yeah, didn't go much better for you though, mate.
No, I didn't, mate. I wasted a boost on this guy, and I think it just made everything worse. So I ended up with 284, so I did beat you this week, only just. But, realistically, my goals over the last couple of weeks have obviously been cash generation is what I've been touching on, and obviously you've been going for points where I've been going for cash. And I made a lot of cash as well, but obviously didn't really get much points of production out of Jaylen Adams, obviously. But finished off with 284, moved down 1,321 spots to 1,972. So just inside of the top 2,000, which is absolutely embarrassing, for the lack of a better word there, mate, to be honest with you. But let's get into some of our reactions from last week, mate. Now, we're going to touch on our good performers, our poor performers, and even a couple of guys who you can throw in there as poor performers who obviously got injured throughout the week. Jaylen Adams, for Christ's sakes. But let's start off with some of the good performers, mate. I'm going to go straight to you here. I want to hear some of your good performers on your team, and then obviously from the whole NBL Supercoach world.
Yeah, well, I didn't really have anybody that went well, to be honest. Like, I'm having a look at my team right now to go, okay, who was it that sort of outperformed what you expected? And nobody really did. I made, I don't know, we'll get into the bad performers, but I think like my best was Montrezl Harrell, who had scored 57. Otherwise, I didn't have anybody that scored more than that. And I guess the big one that you got to be happy about, if you still had him in your team, was Kelly LePepe, who is now back earning some cash again if you didn't already have him on the chopping block and sell him early, because he scored 57 points in his matches. So that was huge. And I think at least Cam Oliver as well did all right. He has been playing a little bit up and down, but I think he sort of reaped a bit of the benefits of Jaylen Adams not playing. He saw a lot more of the ball, so he was pretty dominant. I thought he had a really, really good game against Adelaide in basketball terms, and he did in Supercoach as well. So there wasn't a lot of good in my team, but I think you got to sort of be happy with maybe some of these outside players that some people may have still had in their team. With Tyrell Harrison scoring 43 points was his biggest performance of the year. He had a really, really solid game, and then even Xavier Cooks sort of saved his weekend. I think for people, a lot of people put a lot of faith into him and would have had him as their captain this week. And he scored 19 in the first game against Adelaide, and it wasn't looking too crash hot. But then he scored a 49 against Cairns, so it really got him back and repaid those that were smart enough to have Cooks as their captain and not Jaylen Adams. But yeah, otherwise, yeah, it was a pretty dismal week for me personally with top scorers. But did you have anybody that has repaid you for your faith in them last week?
Yeah, to be honest with you, mate, I think I have got a couple of guys now. Sam Wardenberg's probably the one that I think repaid me the most. So he tied for the highest score of the round, which was 68. So him and Xavier Cooks had the same score. And if you look back to last week, he had a projected of 50 and a break even of 50. Now he comes into this week's game with a break even of now 7, priced at 273,000. So I brought him in at 225k. So already made 50k on him and potentially could make another 10 to 15, even 20k on top of that over the next couple of weeks as well, which is very nice, which is what we want to see. And then obviously a couple of other guys who didn't give me the points in terms of obviously having double game weeks, but really gave me a nice little cash injection in Casey Prather as well, who made me 40k, who I brought in, who gave a 32-point performance off the bench for me last week. And obviously Jack White as well, who gave me 34 points, and I started him over Kelly LePepe, unfortunately, but he still made me another 17k. So a couple of guys there just ticking the bank account over slightly just to be able to make things a little bit easier down the track. And my team value is now sitting at $2.5 million, which is up there so far in terms of obviously a couple of other teams up there as well. So it's going to be interesting over these next couple of weeks in terms of, the cash, cash increases and sort of money-wise compared to obviously the points as well, which obviously Jez and I have gone in different paths. But let's go into some poor performances, mate. Now, I'm going to kick it off first here because there was probably no worse a performance than Milton Doyle. Now, fortunately, neither of us have him in our teams, but the reason I wanted to touch on Milton is the fact that the Tasmanian Jack Jumpers play 2 games this week, and Milton Doyle scored 0. A big fat 0, Jez. Now, you're a Jack Jumpers fan. I'm interested to hear what you have to say after this, but he comes into his double game week with a break even of 88 points. So it's going to be incredibly hard for him to hit that, I think, personally, with the way that he's obviously playing his basketball over the last couple of weeks. And obviously the Tasmanian Jack Jumpers just not really looking like they're a Supercoach friendly team, even an NBL team in general, to be honest with you. So I think he had a very, very poor week.
Buddy. Take it easy.
And then obviously Benny Henschel as well is the other guy. So only had 4 points this particular week. He's lost his role, to be honest with you, since the start of the season. I think he had COVID, obviously, for that game against the Sydney Kings where he missed out on, where people were very excited about him. He'd started in the lineup. He'd had a really, really big role for the Perth Wildcats. But he looks like he's lost his role, his spot in the rotation, and it looks like he's lost a little bit of confidence as well, which does tend to happen, I guess, with these younger guys as well. So it's going to be interesting to obviously see where he goes in the future, because all it takes is one good game and that cash is rolling again. But Jez, who are some of the guys who were very poor for you and your team, or some of the guys around the league that were quite poor as well?
Yeah, well, most of the poor ones were in my team. Another big duck egg was Lat Mayan, and this one, he got 0 in his first game against Sydney. And this hurts me a lot because I didn't bring in Wardenberg. I took in Mayan instead of Wardenberg, and look what the difference there, because I think at least he dropped 4.2k this week. He did earn a little bit of money, obviously, earlier. But yeah, he got a 0 and then sort of saved it a little bit with a 19 versus Melbourne. He's been averaging about 15. So I guess, 10 points down on what he should have averaged over those 2 weeks. So that certainly hurt. But yeah, the big one is when you're looking at poor performances, it is the Jack Jumpers. The whole team is there anybody you consider besides Magne in the Jack Jumpers team? And it sort of puts you in a really, really tough spot this week, because there's obviously only 2 teams that are on double game weeks, and that's the Jack Jumpers and New Zealand. And it's okay, well, how many New Zealand players can you put in? And they're also pretty untested if you consider how their first 2 games playing against the 2 worst defensive teams in the competition, obviously giving you more Supercoach points. So it's really tough. Do you bring in some Jack Jumpers, or do you not? They, I think, have a double game week this week and then a single game week, and then they go on a little bit of a run. So yeah, it is really, really tough to go, okay, you can't really load up on Jack Jumpers because they aren't scoring very well. Maybe there is a couple of guys like Deng that are earning money So if you're looking down that road, you could bring them in, but it is certainly going to hurt your score. Bringing in someone like that, I guess. But if you have them on the bench but and earning a bit of cash, I think that's all right. So yeah, it is really, really tough. It makes things really, really tough because I think a lot of people would have brought in Milton Doyle this week just to try and get some extra points and get some edge and hold him over the next sort of month of NBL. So, yeah, really, really tough spot now with Doyle being an absolute dud last week.
Yeah, and I even question Magne to a certain extent as well because he's only had mid-20s over his last couple of weeks. His break-even is at 61 right now, and he lost 20K last week as well. So he's back to what he originally started at, $317,000. So no one's made money on him, but no one's lost money just yet, to be honest with you, depending on when you brought him in. So it's going to be very interesting over this next round, especially obviously with them playing the double game week, like you mentioned, which we'll go into a little bit more in detail very soon. But let's get into the injuries, obviously, from this round, mate. And there was one injury on everyone's mind, I think, personally. Majority of the top teams would have had him in some capacity, whether it would have been just a starting player. But the unfortunate ones, mate, just like myself and yourself, had him as captain now. He had 12 points in game one and didn't even decide to rock up with a poor little back like Jeremy spoke about earlier and didn't even play game two. And it was quite a weird one, to be honest with you, mate, because I watched the highlights of that game and the extended highlights as well. Is it just me, mate? He just doesn't look interested, to be honest with you, with playing basketball. And he does this from time to time in the NBL, which we've seen over the last couple of seasons. Last season in particular, where the start of the year, it just looked like he's waiting for the playoffs to start or the end of the season to start where it matters more and doesn't really care too much at all. So, I don't know. It's going to be a tough one for me with Jaylen Adams because I think he's the number one guy on this team, to be honest with you, because he's the most important player because the ball's in his hands the most. But I don't know. There's just something about him that's starting to freak me out. And I even think with Brian Goorjian, there's a few things that I'm starting to question because these rotations aren't getting shorter. I think they played 11 guys in game one and 10 guys in game two of round number 4. That's not a very Supercoach friendly sort of lineup and rotation, is it, mate?
Yeah, I think it was even they played 12, if I recall, against Adelaide. And because just purely on the stat that I remember the commentators were saying that every one of the 12 players had a 3-point attempt. So it's like, so really sort of showing the way that they're playing, throwing out a whole lot of threes. But so lucky you're not getting deducted for missed shots in Supercoach anymore. So that's but yeah, it is crazy and it is really, really tough, these guys. But yeah, you're going to just be working on players like Xavier Cooks that are definitely going to produce all the time. And you know their role. But I think with Jaylen Adams, yeah, it just felt like, I don't know, he's promised so much at the start in those first 2 weeks, and it looked like he was going to be on fire. And then he's been missing shots. So he had some like shots in that game against Adelaide, and it just didn't look like he's on at all and sort of rushing things a lot. So yeah, it is a big flag there now, obviously, with him being injured. And then just before we move on, I think that another sort of injury that we need to discuss really, really quickly is Taron Armstrong. Obviously, you wanted to have him in last week, and a lot of people had him in because he was on that double game week and had such a good couple of rounds. But now he does still sit with a break-even of -3, but is on now a run of single game weeks. So, or do they have a double game week next week?
They have a double game week next week, I believe. Yeah. I'm just getting up that now, just getting up our schedulizer. So they go double game week. They had a double game week last week, single this week, and then they go a double next week before 4 singles, though. So maybe a quick little cash injection.
Yeah, so it could be definitely worth bringing him in if you want to get him in this week, so you still get that initial boost after his 2 big games, and then hold him through that double game week and maybe a sell. So he's someone that I think you got to consider that maybe a lot of people have given up hope of after he was injured last week. So yeah, I think definitely I'm looking at bringing him in over the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, I like that a lot. That's actually a really good sort of point there, I think you raised. I think it's one of those ones that, yeah, it's a bit of a worry because he's been injury corrupted or interrupted throughout the whole start of this season and even in preseason as well. So what's to say that the body is going to be 100% right now? But if he's at his peak of his powers, which we've seen in round number 3, he's a guy who you definitely want in your Supercoach team because the ball doesn't really leave his hands too much, I
Right.
think, personally. It's always in his hands. He's got the chance
Yeah.
of the double-doubles. He's got the chance of the high-scoring games as well. So great little point there, mate. But let's get into some of the schedulizer thoughts for this round. Now, if we're looking at this round, like we've sort of touched on to start the episode, there are two teams with double game weeks, the Tasmanian Jack Jumpers and the New Zealand Breakers. Now, quick little question here, Jez. Obviously, as we all do, we all want 5 starting players who are on double game weeks. Now, in a week like this, as a fresh Supercoach player, how many do you think is too little? And obviously, how many is too many? Because both of these teams, I do believe, let me just have a quick little look here. The Tasmanian Jack Jumpers go into a single game next week, but the New Zealand Breakers do play a double game week. So maybe you're loading up more on the New Zealand Breakers players over the Tasmanian Jack Jumpers, maybe?
Yeah, but I think just purely on, I think in this, it is a really, really difficult week because there's not a lot of quality, I guess, in these two teams that you want to have over the next month, especially when it comes to, say, the following round, when so many teams with so many good players are on double game weeks. And some teams, say Sydney, go on a run of 2, Melbourne United go on a run of 3. And then, even Southeast Melbourne go on a run, and they're struggling. But maybe you're looking in to bring in someone like Matt Hurt if you want points.
Sobey.
So or maybe Sobey if you want to keep going, falling down the rankings. So I think it's when you're going to use your boost, and I know you're flirting with using your boost this week. But like I was also doing that. I think it's more about. I think it's more about just having enough. I currently have 3 double game week players in my team, and that may be too little. But I think if I was going to use a boost this week, it's more to try and pick up someone that's going to be generating a bit more cash than maybe generating points, because you're just not sure. You don't want to waste a trade on somebody that's not going to perform over the next month, because it might be worth making sure you have all the big players in your team from round 6 and using a boost to make sure you've got more quality in your team for the double game weeks than anything else. So it is a really tough one. It's going to be interesting to see. I think you'll see a lot of rise and fall in the rankings for a lot of people because of what tactic they take this week, but I don't think it necessarily means that they're better or worse than anybody. It's just going to be a tactical decision, and more needs to be judged over the next month than what actually happens this week.
No, definitely. I think this is going to be a week where we really start to see some major changes in teams, because like you mentioned, there's going to be guys who go for, 4 or 5 double game week players this week and may struggle next week. Or there's going to be guys like myself who currently only have 2 players on the double, which we'll get into a little bit later on. But now when we're looking at single game weeks, obviously the rest of the NBL teams do have that. Now, double game weeks next week. So the Cairns Taipans have a single this week, go into a double like the Illawarra Hawks do. Melbourne United, obviously New Zealand go into a double game week, and then you've got the Sydney Kings and Southeast Melbourne Phoenix all playing double game weeks next week, which is going to be very interesting, because I think it does change some trade sort of thoughts, I guess you could say, to be honest with you, because you're not wanting to sort of go too gun-ho on these two teams this week, because there's such a vast sort of, I guess, expansion or pool of players who you can choose from next week as well. So we'll sort of touch on my team a little bit later, and that's where I've sort of gone. I think I'm going to really attack these more bulker sort of double game weeks to be able to get some of the better players, because, if we're trading out some of these really top-ended talented players for some of these guys who might only give us 40 points on a double game week, I don't think you're really leveraging too many points there as well, or sort of leaking too many points. So it's going to be interesting. And then, like you mentioned there, mate, obviously Melbourne and Southeast Melbourne have 3 double game weeks in a row, which is very, very attractive. Now, let's jump into some of our early trade thoughts, mate. Now, I'm going to chuck this over to you straight away before I get into mine, because I've written a few little things down here to, I think, 1, run these by you to sort of justify my trade ideas, and obviously 2, to be able to get these out in the open as well, mate, because for a lack of a better word, mate, I'm shitting myself this week, because it looks like my 3rd boost may be used. But let's hear your trade thoughts, mate.
Yeah, well, I think the clear trade for everybody and anybody is doing whatever you need to do to get Parker Jackson-Cartwright in your team. And it makes it an easy call when you've had someone absolutely I don't know, I was going to say something very disgusting, but I will keep it PG and just say, yeah, someone that really hurt us last week, and that's Jaylen Adams. So it's pretty much a clear swap there. You take the hit of him losing a bit of cash and just trade him out now, especially like with stuff that we've touched on. It just doesn't feel like he is the guy that he was in those opening few rounds. So he's a clear swap purely based on points for anybody, because I think you have to have Parker Jackson-Cartwright in your team this week. Otherwise, you are, I don't know what you're doing. You're playing NRL Supercoach because you haven't been watching what's going on in the NBL. So, yeah, and then I've traded in Menenga for Lat Mayan. He's done his job. He lost 4.2K. Get him straight out and put Menenga in. And then there is some other, there's a couple of guys that are really going to sort of earn a bit of cash. And I think that's where your conundrum is. Who are you thinking to bring in to bring cash? And I guess, it'd be nice to discuss if it is worth that boost this week, because I'm sitting on the fence also looking at a similar tactic to what you're going to do, but is it worth that boost or not this week?
Yeah, it's definitely the biggest question. I think it was even a big question last week. We spoke about this pretty extensively as well. To boost or not to boost was the title of the show as well, to a certain extent. But so I've gone down the same line. So I've gone Jaylen Adams to Parker Jackson-Cartwright. So Jaylen Adams has got a break even on a single game week of 65. And Parker obviously returns to the NBL, has a break even of 65 himself, but obviously over 2 games he's averaging 50 to start the year, so his projections are 86. I think that is a no-brainer. I think we've both nailed that one there, which is great. Hopefully it all works out well for us. See. But
doesn't pull a hammy.
Definitely. But don't say that. But the other 2 trades that I've gone with now, this is where it's going to be coming down to cash for myself personally. So I've traded out Cam Oliver. Now obviously he's got the double game week next week, which I completely understand, but I just think where his break even is at right now, he's going to lose me cash more than what I obviously started with. So I think he was at $273,000 off the top of my head. I might be wrong. So 273.6 is what he's currently priced at. So he's already lost us 3.4K for the season. His break even is 26 this week. Yes, he could definitely hit that, but he could go under it as well. And then obviously he could lose cash next week. So I've decided to go Cam Oliver to Sam Menenga, and then I've obviously gone I've traded out Kendrick Davis and gone to Tyler Robertson as well. So Tyler Robertson had a 46 last week. His break even is now at negative 16, and his projected is 16 as well. He's looking to go up $43,000 this week. So, the way I look at it, potentially could make between, let's just say 50 and 75,000 just from these trades alone. Plus, I've also got $300,000 left over in the kitty to spend next week when we're looking at obviously bringing in these top-end talented players to really fill up that sort of pool in our starting lineups as well. So it's definitely a tough one, mate, because it's hard. You can go both ways here and obviously use the sort of boost trade to be able to, bring in a couple of guys who one could score you more points or make you more cash. But, to be honest with you, if it's only going to make you, let's just say 20K, is the 20K worth a boost when you might need that later on in the season? That's the big question, I think, on everyone's minds.
Yeah, I think... I think like the biggest challenge I'm having is you could also bring in somebody maybe that's going to earn you a little bit of cash this week, but also make sure that you're going to have, I don't know, close to probably 10 players next week, potentially on double game weeks. So I that's where it sort of falls for me, is being able to, you either boost this week and try and earn some cash, or you use your boost anyway next week to get in a guy that you want to have, so you don't fall too far behind in points with everybody having stacked sides with a lot of double game week players. So I think it's either this week or next week, and I've still only used 1 boost, so I could potentially use 2 boosts this week and then be in the same boat as you with just 1 left after round 5 or round 6. So these boosts, they're killer. They're absolutely killer.
I nearly think they're even actually better to get rid of early, so you're not having to worry about it. I think it actually does make you sort of focus on the schedule a little bit more and sort of plan your team out a little bit nicer. But why don't we get into showing our teams, mate? Let's get your team up on the screen first here, and we're going to analyze Jez's team for round number 5. And we can touch on obviously a few of the things that we've been talking about, which is obviously we're trying to have maximum amount of players on double game weeks next week. So run us through your team, mate. Who are you thinking of obviously captaining, which we'll touch on a little bit later as well in Dark's doubles? And what are you sort of hoping, I guess is the right word, from some of these guys?
Yeah, I don't know. Like it is, I'm hoping Magne goes off just because you kept faith in him last week and kept him in the team. And then he didn't really produce. He hasn't really been producing, like you said. It's been besides that one sort of score he had where he got, I think, almost 50 or something in one game, 49 or something like that. Then otherwise he hasn't really done a lot. So you just hope that he goes big and really starts to get involved, scores points and gets more rebounds. I think his rebounding has been a little bit lower than what we would have expected. So you just sort of hope that pays off this week. And there's a lot of people that got rid of him. So I think, definitely that's going to be the game changer, I think, for me, if you have a good week or a bad week, really. I think a lot of people bring in Parker Jackson-Cartwright, and the majority of people will likely captain him because there's not really any other captain option this week, as we'll get into a little bit later. I think a lot of people being in Menenga. I think the only other player that I was sort of considering was Matt Mooney, because I think he averaged 25 or something. He still has a pretty low price as well, so he's expected to have a price rise this week and could also give you some good double points. So that's sort of the trade that I was looking at if you weren't bringing in Tyler Robertson as well on the bench. But I'm sort of loaded with Sydney players already at the moment, and it'd be nice, I think, to have, maybe you got to look at Xavier Cooks the week after. So you don't want to have that overload of Sydney players. But yeah, and then there's also a little bit of question marks around Montrezl Harrell this week, because you don't really know exactly how fast Adelaide are going to move. If Jarrell Martin is going to play this week, is Harrell a potential rest, or is he off contract this week before they do the deed and sign him like they pretty much have to, like we talked in Beyond the Buzzer, where we broke it down, and also on in your article on bets.com, where you break down all of that. So yeah, that is a big risk. I think you find out that he goes, you've almost got to sell him and use that boost to get somebody else, don't you? Because I'd be in a world of trouble if he's a do not play. And then on my bench, I'm carrying a little bit. Got to carry Ben Henschel because don't have the trade really, and same with Toucan's guys. They may as well keep them in there for the moment because they do have that double game week the week after. But Antonio's been sort of doing okay there, bubbling away. He was you had a little bit of luck, obviously, with Taron Armstrong getting injured. But if Armstrong comes back, you see his production or his time on the court go down. And it's just a matter of then if he hits those few 3-point shots that he takes. So, I'm not overly happy with where my team sits at the moment. But I think it's all about trying to find a little bit of cash generation somewhere over this week, and then focusing on making sure you don't fall too far behind in points over the next 3 weeks after that, when there is this overload of teams on runs of double game weeks.
Yeah, no, so obviously when I'm looking to your team, the only thing that I can really think of in terms of what you might be able to do to sort of change up a few things or make a trade as well, because you've been touching on your boost and obviously the cash generation side that they will sort of produce, I guess you could say, is probably getting rid of one of Ben Henschel or Jonah Antonio for a Tyler Robertson as well. I believe it would be nearly a straight swap. Obviously, with both of those guys, you're probably looking at making 40K, to be honest with you, this week. I think Robertson's at 107K. So, realistically, you've got enough money there to be able to make that sideways move, in a sense, to be able to make a little bit more cash and probably some more points as well. So, it's a hard one, but I think the overall team structure I do like a lot. I think Harrell's a guy who's probably good for 30 points most weeks, to be honest with you, with his double-double sort of, campaign and his trophies that he's probably racking up there as well, with the MVP chance later on in the season if he does continue to stay in the NBL. And Kendrick Davis, he's one the guy that I didn't want to trade, to be honest with you, this week, but I think, to be honest with you, he's just showed me the floor this round. So what was it, 13 points in game 2 of this round? So that's the floor now where he can drop down to on any given week now, which does tend to scare me. So it's very hard, obviously, to see a guy like him go out of our teams, because he had that massive week last week where he just sort of ricocheted me back up the rankings, to be honest with you. And I thought, I got a chance here, but now obviously Jaylen Adams absolutely shot me in the ass last weekend. But yeah, an overall really, really good spot. I think your team is in. I think you'll have a couple of guys obviously playing double game weeks next week. So you'll have Menenga, Parker Jackson-Cartwright, Jonah Antonio, Cam Oliver, Kile Lepepe, and obviously Kyron Galloway as well. So obviously 2 trades or maybe 3 next week. And you're looking at probably 9 or 10 guys, to be honest with you, who you could be starting on double game weeks, which is absolutely huge. But let's jump into my team, mate. I'm going to run you through what I am sort of thinking. And very different to you. Now, I probably haven't got the star players, I guess, in terms of name-wise who are playing on my field in terms of playing single game weeks. But Casey Prather is a guy I brought in last week, like we mentioned earlier, made some really, really good cash for me. Scored 32 points last week. He's got a break-even of -2. If he scores anywhere similar to last week, he probably should make about the same amount of cash. We could be seeing him as a 230 to 240K player next week. So I'm going to start him on the single this week. I think if he gives me 30 points, I'm happy with that. Sam Wardenberg and Jack White are the exact same with that as well, hoping to obviously get that sort of 30 to 35 points out of those 2 guys. And then I've got Lepepe, Robertson on the bench as my backup forwards. Just 2 guys who hopefully can score 15 to 20 points in a single game week. And obviously the most important part as well is make cash. So one of those guys, Lepepe, -12, and Robertson, -16 on the break-even side of it all. And then I've got Shea Illy as well, who I've been holding on because their run gets really, really good, like we've mentioned. I think he's a guy who can score, like his average is 23. He can score mid-20s to early 30s, I think, most weeks. So he's a guy who's going to make me a little bit of cash, I think, personally. He made, I think it was 12K last week. So in the grand scheme of things, not a lot of money, but still gave me 26 points off the bench as well, which is what I'm trying to achieve at the moment. So it's going to be very interesting. But yeah, I've gone the same thing. I've gone Parker Jackson-Cartwright as the captain. I think a lot of people are going to be doing that. It's going to be a very, very popular choice. I'm sure he's probably going to be the number 1 option for yourself when we're touching on captains very, very shortly. But like I mentioned at the start of the episode as well, though, the most important part and exciting part for me personally is having $304,000 next week to use for some of these trades as well. So when we're looking at guys who are on double game weeks next week, I've got Jack White, Wardenberg, Menenga, Parker Jackson-Cartwright, Illy, and then the 2 Sydney boys. So I've only got 3 guys who aren't playing double game weeks next week. So using 2 of those trades, I could be looking at 9 guys who are playing double game weeks next week as well. So I feel like my team's in a pretty good spot in terms of obviously point scoring as well as obviously cash generation, but I'm looking forward to seeing obviously how it does go over the next couple of weeks. But what are some of your thoughts, mate? Is it a decent enough team to sort of contend?
No, I think you're in extremely good shape. I think the key for you really that makes I like ranking your team higher than mine in where we sit at the moment is that you have Shea Illy and Jack White still in your team heading into their big stretch of double game weeks, because they're guys that I think everybody will potentially want. I think Jack White you need to have in your team for that run because he's shown that he's just at least been consistent. Like you were sort of mentioning with Kendrick Davis of having that floor. I think with Jack White, I think we've seen him sort of start games really slow, but then he finishes really strong or vice versa. So you get a more of a consistent, you're going to get 30 points from Jack White and you know that, and it can be a little bit higher definitely as well. So, and with Shea Illy, it's been you're getting a solid guy that's going to produce points. So you look to the following week, you're in extremely good shape. And I think this week it is. I don't think any of the, I guess, top players, I don't think you even have you don't have the trades to stack up on New Zealand and Tasmania players there because you don't have those players in your team. So I think most people are going to be in the same boat as us with maybe 2 or 3 New Zealand players or Tasmania players in their team. So it's going to be just one of those weeks that most of the competition doesn't have 5 starters that are on double game weeks this week. And if you do, you're probably going to be in maybe bad shape, or you were in bad shape before, or you're going to be in bad shape after. So, and you don't even know if Tasmanian players are going to score over 10 points anyway. So, I think we're all pretty much. I think we're all pretty much in the same boat this week, and that's just going to be the way it is. So. Yeah, I don't know. I'm a little bit jealous in that you've got all that cash. It's you're in a good spot.
No, it's definitely exciting. I'm spewing on one trade last week, to be honest with you, though, mate. And
Mm.
it was the guy I traded out for Jaylen Adams, and I wish I didn't do it. And that's Darius Days, and he's a guy who I'll be looking to bring back into my team next week when they have their double game week, I believe it is, or maybe it's the following week. But yeah, he's a guy who I can't wait to get back into my team after another 43 points or whatever it was last week. But we're now going to jump into our favorite segment, mate. Your segment all by yourself. Darks
Big boy,
doubles,
my own segment.
captain, yes, the best captain segment going around in NBL Supercoach. Let's go, mate. Give us your best 2 or 3 options for this round, because there's probably not a lot of selection, is there?
No, I think there's 2, and really probably only one, and that is Parker Jackson-Cartwright this week. I don't think anybody. It's more of a question: is it too early to take a risk? Because you could take the risk and maybe try and find someone that is going to produce points a little bit unexpectedly, but it is a huge risk considering he averages 50 in those first 2 games, and the whole offense is obviously going through Parker Jackson-Cartwright, and it's like, and his chances of doubles with assists is huge. So even if he's not scoring, he still should be scoring by getting assists, and he's definitely going to rack up close to 20 points a game anyway. So 20 normal basketball points, and probably close to 50 points, or I think you can expect at least over 35, 40 points from Parker Jackson-Cartwright. So you have to have him, but I think if you're going to take a risk in my team, it's only maybe putting some faith into Magnay, because he does have a high ceiling if he's on. And that would be a risk, but it might be. I think it's too early to take a risk on Magnay. Nobody's in, still sitting, say, around 1,500, top 2,000. I think you could fall very, very, very far behind if Parker Jackson-Cartwright goes off and you have anybody else, because you're all of a sudden back, 100 points, 200 points. If you make the wrong choice. So, yeah, I think there's only one choice in Dark's double this week, and that is Parker Jackson-Cartwright.
I've got 3 names for you here, though, mate. Now,
No.
I think a lot of people are going to have Parker Jackson-Cartwright in their team, I think, for sure. I think there's going to be a couple of guys, though, who don't make it. Now, if you're going for cheapies, let's just touch on some of the guys who may not be able to get to the top of that sort of price range in 421. You got Matt Mooney for the New Zealand Breakers. Then, obviously, for the Tasmanian Jack Jumpers, you've got Milton Doyle and Jordan Crawford. Now, rate those 3 guys 1, 2, 3 for me. Now, 1 being the guy who you should captain the most, the best option, and 3 being the worst option. I know it's off the top of your head, but just a rapid-fire question there, mate, because it's a tough one, I think, personally.
I would probably rank Milton Doyle as the top choice. I think what scared everybody is that he got 0 last week. So that's his bottom is 0. And I think teams know now they can do a lot to contain him offensively, which is obviously going to hurt his Supercoach scoring. And Tasmania just not scoring points, so it's tough. He needs to have a really, really big game, and it is possible. I think if he didn't get a 0 last week, I think we would have seen a lot more people bring Milton Doyle into their teams on this double game week. And Jordan Crawford is completely hit and miss. I think Matt Mooney would probably come in as second for me, because I think you get more of a consistent showing out of him. He's going to be have his hands on the ball still quite a lot behind Parker Jackson-Cartwright. So I think he's could definitely be an option there, because you should get some consistent points out of him. But it is really, really tough with New Zealand players, because we just don't really know yet how good they are and how consistent they are, because they played Southeast Melbourne and Brisbane in those first 2 weeks. So it's really, really unknown, but you take the risk and you can definitely reap the reward if you're brave enough. And then, Jordan Crawford, who knows? He could have 2 30-point games, 30-point, NBL scoring games. It's definitely possible, because they're in the shit and they're under pressure and someone needs to start scoring. So does he stand up? Maybe.
Definitely. It's going to be interesting. I've got some stats here for you guys who are thinking of maybe bringing in Jordan Crawford, Milton Doyle, those 2 names there. So Milton Doyle last week, 4 points, 5 rebounds, 1 assist, 1 steal, and 7 turnovers to go with that for a 0-pointer last week. And then you've obviously got Jordan Crawford, who had his best game, I think, for the season so far. 19 points, 4 rebounds, 5 assists, 2 steals, and 37 Supercoach points with only the 1 turnover. So, that is an incredible sort of game for him there. But yeah, like you've mentioned there, I think the games where he is super, super good are very high up there, but his poor games are what we've seen with Milton Doyle last week as well. So it's going to be very interesting, obviously, to see what happens over the next couple of weeks, and obviously this round in particular. But that will wrap up today's episode of NBL Supercoach Sessions. Obviously, a lot going on at the Basketball Fix. We've got Path to Pro, which is a series that Ryan's doing. He's got an incredible guest in, I guess, one of the creators and founders of the Next Star program, Liam Santamaria. So make sure you guys stay tuned for that and check that one out, because I'm super excited to hear what he has to ask Liam, and obviously what Liam has to say as well. We've obviously got Beyond the Buzzer coming out tomorrow as well, which we're looking forward to hearing your feedback on that particular episode as well, because that was an incredible episode, to be honest with you, recapping last week's round, and obviously looking forward to this week as well. And then obviously we've got Higgins' Hot 3 Takes, which will be out at some stage this week. I can't tell you what day. I'm traveling.
Hopefully
America
from the
at
casino
moment.
floor. Can you do it
Oh.
in a casino somewhere in the background?
I could
Get
definitely
amongst
try. I'd definitely love to try it. But it's smoking on a cigar, Higgins' Hot 3 Takes. But
Yeah,
a lot of
beautiful.
interesting topics, because whilst I've been over here in America, it has been incredibly hard to watch NBL basketball and even stay up to date with it. So the NBL have got a lot of work to do. But Jez, mate, that's going to wrap up today's episode. I think it's been a very good episode. I think a lot of our listeners have got a very good insight into what we're doing for our NBL Supercoach teams, and hopefully they've got a little bit out of it as well, mate. But until next time, that has been your Basketball Fix.
Which stars come to play? He's the biggest of them all. Step back, 4-3. Phoenix forced a turnover at halfway. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Took it.
Clock at 10. Adams the off balance. Oh!